Dr. Johnben, why is it hard for men to open up to their wives about a medical condition like erectile dysfunction?
Well, it's interesting you call it a medical condition. It is, and sometimes it's actually a psychological condition.
Hmm.
So, what could happen to some men is that when they're trying to perform in bed, they do find that the reason why they're not able to perform is because of other reasons that are not really medical. So, for
Right.
example, maybe they are bored, with their marital connection,
Hmm.
sexual intimacy, or some men may also be, self-stimulating using, stimulating images or videos and things like that on their own. And
Right.
so they don't really want to open up and talk about that because they think they know the reasons.
Right.
So if they did open up, then they might risk some kind of conflict with their spouse.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because it's awkward to start with, and then after that, the the partner might go, "Is it me?"
Or am I not enough?
Right.
exactly, exactly. In situations I've seen where the couple or the man is facing an organic or medical issue, and the relationship is quite good and
Hmm.
intact, typically they are able to talk about it because the man doesn't have that sort of guilt,
Right.
lingering behind in his mind, thinking
Right.
like, well, actually, this is my fault.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that if the problems stem from a more psychological standpoint as opposed to physiological, um, that brings in a lot more sort of difficulty for them to open up about the physiological consequence of it, so to speak.
Yes, yes, because they themselves will be feeling guilty or they kind of think they know why this
Right.
is the case. And sometimes it's actually mixed. So it's
Right.
not just one or the other. But if a man thinks that the reason I'm not performing is I'm not able to get it up is
Hmm.
because my wife is not so interesting to me anymore compared to these images or videos,
Right.
and my own ability to, give myself the arousal, what am I going to say? So sometimes men will make up things like, oh, work stress, or I have to wake up early, etc.,
Right.
etc. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So why is it important to have this discussion with your partner, though, regardless of whether it's, medical or
Yeah. Well,
mental?
sex is a very important part of marriage. And so, sexual intimacy is a relationship. So if you are not able to talk about your sex, and then what happens is your problems get shelved,
Hmm.
and then you don't deal with it, then other issues crop up, right? And
Right.
people have sort of lingering sort of questions and doubts that could eventually build up to resentment.
Right. And obviously, resentment then leads to even more sort of final decisions.
Yes, it can.
And in your experience, have these issues been resolved relatively easily once they actually start communicating?
So it really depends on how deep the problem goes and how long it's been existing.
Right.
If there isn't, if we're talking about a sexual um, deterioration in the relationship
Hmm.
and not much else, then it is fairly easy to address because the friendship is there, the communication there, the
Right.
long-lived, the love bank is full, if you will.
Right. Oh, I like that. Love
Oh,
bank.
yeah, I like
Okay.
that. But
Got it.
the thing is, like, for a man to want to talk to his partner about this, his spouse,
Yeah.
how do you start? Where do you start?
Mhm. Um, well, I think for those who are struggling with a psychological or relational causal factor for ED, a good place to start is just to say, to your spouse, how comfortable do you feel talking about sex? Believe it or not, there are a good number of couples who actually don't talk about sex.
Right.
They sort of enter into it maybe when they were younger, they talked a little bit, and then it becomes kind of second nature. They just don't talk about it. They do it or they don't do it.
Right. Okay.
So check in with your spouse to see how comfortable she is in talking about it. You can even ask a rating question, like from 1 to 5, 1 being completely uncomfortable and 5 being completely open. And of course, you have to check your own comfort in talking about these things. Start there. And if you find that your partner, your spouse is open to talking about it, then step in and give it a try.
Right.
And if the partner is
Isn't
completely uncomfortable and awkward about it,
Then we have an issue. Yeah.
right. Okay. So I was going to ask you what can't happen if you don't open up. And I guess we're at the issue stage. The answer is issues. So what kind
Yeah.
of issues are we looking at? Someone's got erectile dysfunction, whether it's sort of a medical or a mental reason that this is happening, and they are faced with a partner who doesn't feel comfortable talking about it. What can't happen if they don't open up?
They can't move forward, unfortunately, right? Unless I have seen couples not talk about things, able to go on a holiday, and things get better. It's very interesting. Sometimes
Oh,
context can make a difference. Yes, I know.
okay. Explain
For
that a little bit more for us.
for a talk therapist to say that you can get better without talking, I know it sounds funny. But for example, well, nowadays you can do staycations for a special
Right.
price,
Right.
right? Just going away. So I have found sometimes couples, work stress is a very legitimate causal factor
Hmm.
for ED or other sexual dysfunctions. Going away helps the couple to change their context and to relax and to be able then take the time to perform, and
Right.
enjoy each other's company
Right.
in that way. So that is one way for less communicative, less verbally communicative couples to be able to try to sort of break through,
Mm.
right? And of course, then there is also trying to talk. And if you really can't get through, there are professionals, thankfully, who can help.
So being the sort of the middle guy or gal in between them to sort of facilitate the conversation. Is that what you mean?
The professional middle guy or gal.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. I meant that. Yes.
Because there are friends. Sometimes
Right.
people do engage in friends, and that could be helpful or not helpful.
Mm.
Sometimes people jump right away. Oh, you have ED, you have to go and take this and drink that, and
Oh, right.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
you know,
The unhelpful, helpful friends.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Mhm,
Um, so Dr. Johnben, we spoke to Richard yesterday, who went to his doctor before speaking to his wife. How
mhm.
does this affect the relationship if you open up to someone else who's not your partner first, I guess?
Well, I think generally speaking, there is a lot more acceptance in terms of opening up to a professional like a medical doctor. So hopefully, the doctor will have enough of a holistic health perspective to be able to advise properly. The doctors that I work with, if they have assessed that this is a sexual dysfunction that has a relational or psychological origin,
Hmm.
will refer them to see mental health professionals who can then either
Right.
help themselves or their relationships or both. So talking to professionals in and of itself, I think, is fairly safe. It's talking to the friends that sometimes can impact the couple relationship, depending on how sensitive the spouse is to the level of privacy uh, she feels, yeah, about sex.
But
Right.
technically, I mean, in a relationship, in a marriage,
Hmm.
better for worse, from till death do us part,
Right.
shouldn't the first person you reveal something to be to your spouse and not your friends?
Yeah. So that happens to be my value, and it sounds like that's where you're coming from too. But believe it or not, many couples, Asian couples, do not see their partner as the first source of opening up. Um, I find that Asian families, Asian couples do resort to um, for good or for bad, it really depends, a triangle or a third person to kind of talk it through first. Then they sort of clear their mind, they get their more immediate reactions out of the way so that when they then approach the family member or the spouse to talk about that sensitive topic, it's it's a bit not to say dull, it's less acute, it's less strong, or they
So
would have
raw.
thought through how to discuss it.
Right.
Oh, so it's like a litmus test when you speak to someone else in a way.
I
Let's
guess
see
you could
how
put it that
awkward
way.
this is it?
I guess you could put it that way. Yeah, but it's usually with very trusted friends. Asians don't tend to just come out and talk to anyone.
Right. So it's not something that just comes out at
Interesting.
lunch, right?
And yet us
No one is
Asians,
personal.
especially,
No one affects my manhood. No.
Right, right, yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah.
And yet Asians are so willing to discuss all other manner of things, quite inappropriately sharing sort of medical information about their daughters or son-in-laws to any Tom, Dick, or Harry on the street.
Yeah.
And yet this is
Yeah. Sex is quite taboo. Yeah,
right.
in many of our cultures.
Okay. So as a partner, how do we respond when our other half has told us or wants to speak to us about having ED?
Well, I think in this case, then let's say the partner is female, right, a wife. Then the first thing I would say is take this as your husband wanting more connection, right? This is your husband opening up, trying to be vulnerable, and sharing with you something that could potentially be quite shaming. The fact that he is doing this is a sign of trust. So do your best not to take it personally. You know, do I look old? Am I unattractive? Those kinds of things, right? Put that aside. It's not about you necessarily if he's coming to talk to you about it. Hold that sort of safe space between the two of you so that you can talk it through. That's the first step.
Right. I can understand that, if it was more sort of a medical thing, I've got, my diabetes or my heart is sort of
Hmm.
um, causing these issues,
And the partner knows about
and the
it.
partner knows about it,
Yeah,
or they can say this is this. I can understand sort of the partner perhaps being able to hold that safe space.
absolutely.
What
Yeah.
might be more difficult is if it is sort of a more psychological, or as you said, they find that part of the relationship unstimulating for them.
Hmm.
How would you suggest someone, a partner, sort of be able to absorb that? How can they be in that safe space? Or how can they create a safe space in that kind of conversation?
Yeah. Really, again, it really depends on how serious the issues are and how long has it been going on. Uh, Usually, when start to work with couples, their situation has become quite serious, right? And by the time they come see me, sometimes the exacerbating factors are 2 years long, but then the lingering factors have been going on for a decade,
Hmm.
Hmm.
right? That's when you really, really need a professional who can hold space for you. So if you think that it has been going on for a long time and you've tried, typically couples will have tried in one way or another, cook
Right.
a nice meal, dress differently,
Mm.
ask, let's take a vacation, things like that. These are all attempts, yeah,
Mm.
but they haven't worked. Uh, you might want to consider engaging a professional.
Okay. I like that. I
Yeah,
like that. I like the idea of engaging a professional who actually knows what they're talking about, who can actually help get you to the point you want to get to.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um,
right.
yeah, not so much a waste of time as talking to friends who might not be able
Because
to
I think
help. Yeah.
as couples go, your goal is to get to the finish line, I suppose, together. I want to grow old with you and stuff like this. Everything else
Yeah.
doesn't matter. You want to have that loving relationship all the way, right?
Mm.
Because no one actually goes into a relationship hoping to get a divorce or whatever. But
Yeah.
in this case, do couples sometimes end up in divorce? But it's such a big problem that it hasn't gone well.
There's no fixing or no coming back from
Have you
it.
ever dealt with anything like this?
Not a very clear cut case of ET alone
Mhm.
leading to divorce. No, I
Right.
haven't. But oftentimes it is compounded, what we call comorbidities,
Right.
technical term, that it is more than just one thing, right? The
Hmm.
ED could be seen as the tip of the iceberg. Now you no longer um, find me pretty or desire me. There must be a woman outside,
Right.
right? Then it gets complicated, and then you never know. Just that distance and that distrust then could lead to having another party outside,
Hmm.
right? So the different
Right.
factors converge and build upon one another.
So it gets complicated from what I gather from what you're saying.
Yeah, it's kind of like dysfunctional negative cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
So save yourself the pain and start talking is
Right.
basically, I guess, the message here.
Go through that pain of talking. Yes,
Yes.
because that will resolve it. It's kind of like putting you got a wound, you
Mm.
put the stinging antiseptic on it.
Antiseptic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll find that you'll heal sooner in a week as opposed to it kind of really getting bad and festering and
Mm.
yeah.
In your opinion, what is sort of the main reason that causes men to struggle most with having that first conversation with their partner? Is there any one thing that we can put our finger on?
Lack of familiarity with opening up and being vulnerable. Yeah.
Do you know that's such a relief to hear that? And I tell you why, because if that's the biggest hurdle, that's something that can be learned, right, Doc?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Think about it as going to verbal gym.
Right.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
riding a
let's build
bicycle.
some top muscles.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also starts from home, where I mean, like some kids don't even hug their parents and everything.
Mm.
Is it about that learning to be intimate even when you're very young?
Yeah, there is a personality side to it. Some people come from sort of more quiet upbringings, but they themselves are quite verbal, so they're happy to share. Some people um, have been impacted by their family of origin where things are hush hush.
Mm.
Mm.
Nobody's allowed to talk about emotions. I have had many clients like that. And so they grow up kind of learning how not to talk about emotions.
Oh, interesting.
Another thing is, has there ever been a case where you had to deal with where the husband didn't want to open up, but it was mainly because the wife, usually it's the wife, dragging the husband over to a therapist and say, "We need someone to help us out." Does that create a barrier immediately?
What do you mean by a barrier?
Like the guy is
For
like,
being
"I don't even
forced
want to
to,
be here."
yeah.
I don't personally think that's a problem, but
Mhm.
because we haven't been
I'm here
intimate.
because she made me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. I, I want to say 4 out of 5 times.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting that number.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 out of 4, but I think that's being too kind. My actual experience is 20 years of experience.
Right.
Probably somewhere around 4 out of 5 cases, you have the women bringing the men in,
Right.
right? But I don't think that because it's so normal for us to experience that. I don't see that that's an issue. In fact, if that's the way it's going to be, let that be the case.
I
And
love
what
that.
ends up happening is for us who are male, marriage therapists, the men sometimes say, "Okay, I'll go in if it's a man."
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's
because
less
the man,
awkward.
the man's going to understand me. Well,
Right.
yes, we are, but at the same time, what we're really looking at is your pattern.
Mhm.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes men are afraid that, oh, the women are going to gang up against me.
Right. Okay. Because that's what happened at home with their sisters and their mum, right? That, it's sort of what they've learned.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about not addressing the issue. How
Mhm.
severely can it impact our mental health if we don't address medical issues like erectile dysfunction?
Yeah. Well, usually we talk about erectile dysfunction as a causal fact, mental health issues, mental
Mm.
challenges causing erectile dysfunction rather than the other way around.
Right.
Right.
Mm.
But I have seen, I do remember one particular case when the sexual arousal of a man, and this is physically, physiologically a very manly man, yeah,
Mm.
but just completely lost interest, doesn't get erections, and it was really, affecting his self-esteem, right? So I, I was just gonna say older, and then I realized I'm that age. Um,
It's okay. It happens to
a
us all the
man in his
time.
yeah, a man in his 50s.
A man in his
Um,
prime, Doc.
yes, that's right, in his prime 50s.
Yeah.
So it did, and the conversation there was really about adjusting to understanding what masculinity is about.
Mm.
Because for him, masculinity was so much associated with the ability to perform sexually, with a woman.
Right.
Um, so that's a case whereby I did have the opportunity to work with someone on how the erectile dysfunction, which was organic actually,
Hmm.
affected his sense of self-esteem. But usually we talk about it the other way around.
So if it's a medical issue that causes ED in a
Hmm.
man,
Hmm.
and then let's just say he doesn't talk to someone about it, do they spiral into like a little bit of a depressive state, and then after that, because of that depressive state, it makes the ED even worse, and then it just goes back and forth, back and forth?
It can. It can. So because there is lack of communication, there is a lack of trying to look for a solution because people are afraid, or yeah, they know they don't want to go and see a doctor and see that there's the big C,
Mm-hmm.
cancer, right? So they're so
Yeah.
fearful of getting themselves checked out
Right.
that they don't address the issue. Then the partner starts to suspect, what's going on. Is there a third party, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm.
And then it deteriorates. It affects their relationship health. It can also affect their individual health. They could start to isolate, right? Get
Right.
more and more sort of alone.
And
And
it can be
what men,
healthy mentally for the partner as well, I suppose. Then,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. It can, but not all cases. Yeah, some
Mm.
women are quite happy that the husband is not
To be
asking.
left alone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't touch me, lah.
So,
We're old already, right?
okay, what? Look, watch TV lah.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, some couples are completely happy with that
To have a
situation,
more platonic.
right? Yeah.
But I would imagine, though, even if both sides were happy to be platonic, I know, for example, if one part of my body wasn't working at its optimum, it would still be at the back of my mind, like, is there something more seriously wrong? So I think it would still, wouldn't it, weigh on you that
It can.
just because I don't want it to work now doesn't mean I'm not worried about it not working.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Like I don't need to use a flashlight now, but I think I need to change the batteries on it.
Right. Or I want to know the flashlight
Right.
is going to work
Right.
when I need
Okay.
it, you
Okay.
know?
Right.
Right. Right. I
Okay.
get it. Right.
Okay. So, Dr. Johnben, what advice would you give couples who are experiencing these challenges in their relationship? Be it the woman who realizes something's not quite formed as it should be. I don't quite know how to put this, because perhaps it's the wife who recognizes that things aren't optimal, yes, or whether it's the man who sort of realizes this first. What advice would you give?
Yeah. First of all, assess yourself to see how comfortable you would be in talking about these topics, and try to think through if, say your husband said that actually he is able to be aroused on his own, but not with you. How's that going to feel for you?
Mm.
Right? So assess your own level of comfort at hearing news that might impact your own sense of self-worth. And we're just talking about the wife, right, in this case. And then if you can steel yourself, if you can sort of open up that safe space to talk, then try to talk to your husband. Ask him how comfortable he feels talking about this topic. If he's not comfortable, assess, what's going on. Talk about the relationship. Talk about other things to ease your way in. And if you can open up communication and talk about it and can find a solution, then hey, my work is done. And if you cannot, there are professionals that can help you to bridge the gap. For mental health professionals who are not medical doctors, not psychiatrists, we do, once we see that there could be an organic reason for it, refer you to talk to a specialist or urologist in this case to get more assessment. And if you're afraid to get an assessment, then a good counselor will help you think through it. So to make that first step.
So I know of a couple of people, both men and women, who are married and have had to broker a conversation about difficult things. And both of them used pamphlets and a book. One used pamphlets, one used a book.
All right, just slide it over to the table.
Put in a position. One, I think the book was sort of by the normal armchair they sat in with their coffee to read books, whatever, was placed there. And the other one used pamphlets and left it on the kitchen table. And had left the house to go to work, and so left it there for their partners to sort of find as a way to, be able to start a conversation around that. What would you say to something like that if you really kind of are afraid of hurting their feelings or not sure how to begin?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If that's what is coming to them as a creative first step, do it, because it's not for us to judge what works for a couple.
Mm.
They kind of intuitively know, like, let's try this,
Mm.
or make his favorite meal at a time where he's not expecting it. That could, be another way, right? Follow your hunch. Your relationship. Take that step towards knocking on the door.
Have that conversation, because it's so much easier versus the repercussions or consequences if you don't, right?
Especially when it gets piled up over time, it can get really bad.